Thank you so much for joining for this session for the CSA FinCloud Security Summit 2024. Of course, we're talking about how to innovate for financial services while you can utilize your data and the most innovative of the AI models and LLM models out there and do it in a safe manner. That's really the topic for the discussion today. My name is Rehan Jalil. I'm the CEO for Securiti.ai, which is a company which primarily focuses on enabling the use of data in a safe manner with the AI services. So I think it's needless to say there is the huge drivers on the need of the organizations to use generative AI. And particularly if you look at the financial services, which are driven by information, which are driven by how fast information can actually can be in front of the right people to make decisions, or information can be how fast it can be in front of people to stop bad things from happening. There's a lot of innovation that will fundamentally drive the success of the financial services of one company versus the other, right? Whether the use cases are tied to, robo-advisors or AI chatbots, or how you serve your customers at the inception of their journey, or why you're serving them for customer support. All these actually goes right into the heart of how AI can be helping, how your existing internal data can be helping with you. So there are clearly the drivers to use AI more and more in the financial services. Also, I think this data is very evident. The organizations that do not innovate and do not provide a right digital experience, now more and more is going to be digital experience driven by AI. There is a high churn for those organizations. And clearly these numbers actually will tell you that these are not small numbers of churn when people find better service, better information, most relevant information, and least friction. They're going to stick to those service providers on the financial side of things. So that's also going to be driving the adoption of AI in the financial side of things. Now, the flip side really is that while on the one hand, all these innovations are needed, there are going to be serious considerations on how to the best utilize AI without creating significant risks, downstream risks, and what guardrails have to be there around AI to ensure that the use of AI and use of your own data with AI is actually being done in a safe manner. And so it's kind of a balance. On one hand, it's the best thing to do right now, but on the other hand, particularly the security professionals, the governance, and the professionals and compliance teams, they could really be the partners if they can figure out an automated ways of enabling these guardrails such that innovation can happen within those guardrails. And the best of the things can be built while we know that no significant downstream risks is actually being created around it. And that's really the topic of the discussion today. How do you look at AI and secure it and govern it and the use of the AI itself? But AI on its own is nothing without data, especially in the enterprise use. It is primarily the data that is the fundamental fuel for the AI itself. So the understanding of data, securing it, understanding the access entitlements to the AI systems, understanding the guardrails around data, they go hand in hand, essentially with the compliance and things that you need to put in place. So in that context, we're going to talk about these two things: security of AI, governance of AI, and how it integrally ties to the governance of unstructured and structured data. Now, historically, when the AI has been done, a lot of it is done on structured data. These are decision engines. These are rules, different kinds of rules, different kind of algorithms, heuristics, on which you will feed the data to those mathematical models, and something will come out. Now, more and more unstructured data is going to be utilized. So there's a whole different paradigm of understanding, managing, securing, and governing your unstructured data. That's the new paradigm. which is fast kind of evolving, and we will touch upon that also in a distinct manner. So let's first talk about, if you really want to secure and govern your AI usage from the lens of a security professional, from the lens of a governance and compliance teams, the very first thing is to understand what models are active in the environment. Because there is a groundswell of use of AI inside the organizations, where there's sanctioned use, where there's unsanctioned use. Sometimes people call that unsanctioned use to be your shadow AI. How much shadow AI is there at any given time? And if it's changing, do you know what that is? Similarly, if you have figured let's say if you at any given time, you know exactly these models are active. But which of the models are actually risky? And what are the attributes you want to look at? So that assessment certainly has to be there. Now, let's call this more diagnostics or discovery kind of a thing, but then you actually have to understand what data is potentially going into these models. Can you detect those things? Can you establish some kind of relationship map? And also, if there's an AI model, on one hand, of course, what data is going into the model. On the other hand, if your internal controls, internal policies, internal compliance are tied to it, can you establish a correlation between these things? So at any given time, if you have hundreds of different models or hundreds of different types of AI services active in your environment, can you have a clear picture of what data is going where? You have a clear picture of what kind of assessments have been done on it? Do you have a clear picture of what kind of potential risks exist? And is there a way for you to act upon it along the way? And then just knowing these flows is not sufficient, of course, because the guardrails really fundamentally means that once you have visibility, that you're able to put very explicit controls around the use of AI and the use of data and AI together. And we'll talk more in details about that. And then, no question, there is very new regulations are coming, which is NIST AI RMF, like EU AI Act, and there are a dozen others which are popping across the globe, which would need to be complied with. So how do you know that what controls need to be checked and what controls need to be passed? And you actually have some kind of a common controls you check across your AI systems and map it back to a variety of different standards and regulations that you would need to be complying with if there's an AI getting used. And of course, this has to be done across data from all different systems, right? Because data and AI is kind of intertwined together in that fashion. So touching a little bit upon it more, where is the AI going to be used? Either it's going to be your developers using it in their production environment, non-prod, test environments. So your ability to connect to the systems and have a clear view of what models are there and an inventory of those models be available is a starting point. It's just in the dark, you can figure it out if it's sanctioned, unsanctioned, and what's the state of affairs. Then similarly, if there's no question, the SaaS services that organizations using, they would be adopting a variety of different AI models on the back end. Having that inventory and be available. And there, of course, perhaps instead of discovery, there are other methods for collecting the information to know that what models are active within public cloud and SaaS services, and having one way to place to have an up-to-date catalog of all AI models to be active. That becomes a bit of the starting point, because now you have at least a list established. Now, list will serve the purpose if they have a clear view to know that different AI models, what kind of issues they create. So some kind of a model card to be available where you can look at the model and say, okay, based on standard testing, these are the different ratings of different models. And some are very well-known models, but some are going to be open available in the open source and may not be as popular. Regardless of where they belong, having clarity on the inherent risks embedded inside those AI models, there need to be very clear, so for you to make a decision whether it will become a sanctioned AI or you're going to find a way to get it out of your systems. So that risk rating and risk understanding is increasingly more important. Now, mapping. You have an AI model, now knowing what data is potentially flowing into it or connected to it. And if that connection is there, what is potentially sensitive inside it? And while the data is getting connected, is there any other considerations to be put in place? Which is going to be whether you actually even had consent to actually use that information. Whether certain regulations you should be watching, like cross-border issues, where data from some places now going to modern places you didn't intend to. Having that level of visibility, as much automation as you could do possible, is great, because then you can know like what kind of controls would be justified to be put in place. Now, similarly, if you were to be, if this understanding of the flow of information is there, you could also use to look at from the lens of, straight into compliance side of things, which we'll talk about, like what kind of compliance are going to be needed. Now, once you have this visibility, of course, it becomes important to actually have controls, right? And on the control side, there are two types of things that are going to be watched. One is the data going into these models, whether you're doing it for knowledge systems or whether you're doing for tuning and training. And if data is going into some of these models, or your vector DBs and all, what kind of data is going? And is there a way to stop certain kind of data to be going into these systems? Ability to find information, take the information out, that has to be, is part of the control. On the other side, the control is more about if it's your own knowledge systems, you're making it available to your customers, to your employees, to make sure they're not subject to attack. And these AI systems are now, we clearly know that they're subject to a variety of different attacks. And in fact, OWASP top 10 already has, certain things that would be required. NIST has certain things that should be required to be tested. And these things go into model poisoning attacks, data poisoning attacks, privacy attacks, prompt ingestion attacks, and of course, data exfiltration attacks. And these are becoming, of course, much more clarity on the category of different kind of attacks that you could actually have, similarly like jailbreak attacks that can be there. So there has to be implementation of systems that actually detect all the communication that may be going on or interaction that may be going on between the end user or the agent and your data through these AI systems. And if there is anything along these lines that look like a malicious use or look like an attack, then you would want to make sure that it's not only detected, but actually is protected, is stopped. Because just knowing something going wrong is not sufficient. So on both sides of the model, you would actually need to actually have these kinds of visibility and controls to be there. So again, going back to the safe ingestion of data, as well as having a way to stop things from happening. Now, for all these AI models and the data that's associated with it, and where the AI models are deployed, and the infrastructure around it, and the configuration of all those systems, they all go into how you're actually going to be compliant with the well-known regulations and standards at this point, including NIST AI RMF, and similarly for EU AI Act, which is now pretty much getting there. So how do you map which controls would you want to check? Which kind of practices do you want to check? Which is going to map to both of, multiple of these regulations out there to say, okay, we're compliant with the best ways to actually use the AI in our environment. So again, these are the five steps, starting from the discovery of the models to assessing the risk, to understanding the flow of information, and correlation between AI models and data, and the metadata associated with that data, like consent and regulations and others, internal control that require you to whether use or that require you not to use the data in certain systems. And then, of course, making sure that these guardrails are in place and checking at the end to make sure we are compliant. That gives you a good starting point. Having said that, at the end, it's all about data. So having good best practices around understanding where is your sensitive information, where is your data, and what data you could be using or could not be using. That's something that is more about, having best practices around unstructured as well as structured data. Now, why unstructured is more important? Because these large language models, they understand language very well, and the more and more unstructured information is going to be utilized with these large language models, which means having crisp understanding of the data that is allowed to be used with these models, data that has some sensitive information in all kinds of documents, and then knowing your data landscape much better actually is going to be important. Which means the very first thing is, do you know exactly where unstructured structured data is? Do you know exactly what's inside it? Do you have other context around it? And of course, you want to make sure that to minimize the risk on data, that you're getting rid of all the high risky data to begin with, right? If there is data sitting which should not be in the environment and it's going to be touched by AI models, you want to clean it up. It's a good practice to begin with, that you're minimizing your redundant and trivial and obsolete data, which is the raw data, from your systems. If the data is there, what kind of configurations are around it? And this goes into just the bare bone best practices, that you don't want to lose your data to third parties, whether it is tied to the AI systems or not. It's just the baseline good practice around governance of structured and unstructured data. Now, this is actually becoming more relevant, because which data should be allowed to be used with which AI systems, which AI pipelines. And then, of course, more entitlements inside it can be used to actually, enforce entitlements on the usage of the data within the AI systems itself. Governing the flow of data, knowing the flow of data and governing it really means that maybe certain things you don't want to flow to certain AI systems. And even if it's flowing, you're able to clean it up, essentially, that data. There are different kind of control checks you have to do to make sure that there's compliance is around it. And just a good ability to know if this breach happens in any things within the AI pipeline, what will be the impact of that breach. At a point in time, it would be good to actually have that level of capability around it. It goes to actually understanding the data context. It is not simply about discovering the data. It's about knowing the different elements, a different kind of metadata around this data, and that context around data is actually very important, because that context will help determine whether you can utilize this data in the AI systems or not. And this is actually just a baseline best practice. There could be some data that just should not exist. It's just too old, too stale, have extra copies sitting in places that should not be sitting. Because if this is, again, not very well managed, some data may go into places through these AI systems that it should not be going. So better to, and frankly, it's just a best practice anyways, to reduce the risk exposure by getting rid of all the data. Unstructured data, it becomes much more difficult to actually manage that way. But having that be clean is just a best practice in general. Now, of course, if there is any misconfigurations in your systems, that can cause serious harm, making sure that that's not happening. Entitlements around data, with the clarity knowing that who is entitled to what information through what policies, and do they even need it? And if they don't need it, they're not using it, can you actually curtail it down to least privileged model? And when the data is being required for certain AI systems, you have a way to know to provide the entitlements, but also you have a way to shut things down. And maybe in those AI systems, you want this information to be used in a fashion that it's going to use across everywhere. And this, again, if you have